So chapter 6 deals with God in the political arena. And the first thing is to say the Bible reveals the standards that God requires in public life. Wright singles out three attributes. Firstly, modesty from Deuteronomy 17, which sets out requirements of Israel's kings, that they're not to acquire vast amounts of wealth. Secondly, integrity, and he points us to Samuel's farewell address in 1 Samuel 12 as his testimony of integrity and accountability in public office, and presents that as a model. And then thirdly, justice, the prophetic call for justice to roll down like the waters in Amos 5:24, and Micah's famous verse, chapter 6 verse 8, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? So the Bible reveals the standards that God requires in public life, but it also exposes the idols that God rejects. We saw earlier that we create our own gods out of things that entice us, such as prestige and glory and wealth, or to ward off things that we fear, disease, enemies, bad weather, or to give us what we need, crops, fertility, rain, immortality. And Wright says that those in political life are tempted in three particular ways. Firstly, by the idol of prosperity. The Canaanite god Baal was always a snare for Israel because he offered prosperity without morality. In the modern world, we see the glorification of the powerful at the expense of the weak, where consumerism and celebrity are flaunted alongside poverty. The second tempting idol is national pride. This was the sin of Jeroboam, who built a sanctuary and temple to serve the state. God only exists to exalt the nation and to make it great. And then thirdly, the idol of self-exaltation. It's the Disney mantra, you can be whoever you want to be. It marries narcissism to megalomania. And then the Bible discerns the judgments that God operates within history. The example of this is the book of Judges, where a cycle of sin is followed by disintegration, and then that results in judgment. In the books of Kings, things get worse. The pattern continues as a process of judgment starts to be worked out in Israel's history until the end comes in the form of destruction at the hands of a foreign power. But before we get to that, there are plenty of examples of a society beginning to experience God's judgment. It comes in the form of increasing economic disparity, the corruption of the political system, the corruption of the judicial system, increased violence, increased sexual promiscuity, and the culture of lies and moral confusion. All these are evidence and the outworkings of religious idolatry. And in the end, God gives us up to the operation of his moral judgment. The exile was God's judgment on Israel through the geopolitical realities of the day. And the key thing to note is that what happened to Israel is for our instruction. Paul's argument in Romans 1 is that this is what happens to any society when God gives us up to idolatry. And so we get the governments that mirror the gods we worship. Pride becomes nationalism, greed becomes consumerism, and aggression becomes militarism. Calvin said, when God puts a nation under judgment, he gives it wicked leaders. Now we are ruled by the gods that we love, the nation state, wealth, sex, and self-love. And in the final part of the book, Wright addresses the question, how then should we live in such a world? God's people in an idolatrous world. Chapter 7 explores what it means to be a people shaped by the living God. And Wright has 3 points. Says we must be people shaped by the word of God. Now, essentially, this means living the story of the Bible, making it our story. Now, for some Christians, the Bible is primarily a book of rules. It's an ethical guidebook. For some, it's a book of promises for daily encouragement. And for others, it's a book of doctrine for teaching and learning. Now, of course, it has all of these functions, but it comes in the form of a story. Our task is not to try to make the Bible relevant to the world's story, but rather to live in God's story, And Wright summarises that storyline in 7 parts: creation, rebellion, promise, Jesus, mission, judgment, and new creation. So we must be a people shaped by the gospel story. Secondly, we must be gospel people. That is, people who are committed to the mission of God. The Great Commission from Matthew 28 reminds us that discipleship is missional and that our mission is to make disciples. Wright then gives his 5-fold definition of mission, stating that it consists of evangelism, teaching, compassion, justice, and stewardship. And these areas then provide 3 focal points: building the church, serving society, and stewarding creation. And against the growing attraction of the idea of separation from society, Wright argues from Jeremiah 29 that we are not to give up on society, even as it decays, but must continue to serve within it. And then thirdly says we must be kingdom people. This means submitting to the rule of King Jesus in all spheres of life. For Jesus' disciples, it meant rejecting collusion with the power and wealth of Rome as represented by the Sadducees. Wright labels this as the right-wing option. But they also rejected other radical alternatives, as represented by the Essenes or the Zealots, what we might call the left-wing option. So we must not collude with an idolatrous system. And that means rejecting Christendom too, where church was aligned with state, and it led to the abuse of power, corruption, immorality, and conflict, ending in religious wars and eventually secularism. Now, in the real world, we have to make compromises and choices about political parties when we come to vote. And it's unlikely we'll agree with everything a party puts forward in its manifesto. So we need to discern the ethical priorities of the Bible. Is it the protection of religious freedoms? Is it countering sexual immorality or ending poverty? And Wright reminds us that the Bible has far more to say about economic inequality than it does about other concerns. But whatever conclusions we come to, we mustn't vote simply out of tribal loyalty. So that's chapter 7. What does it mean to be a people shaped by the living God? Shaped by the word of God, gospel people, kingdom people. And then the final chapter is entitled Following Jesus in Turbulent Times. Wright has 2 headings here as we draw to a close. First, we need to be distinctive people, shining the light of God. And he picks up the salt and light metaphors used by Jesus in Matthew 5 and says that both are transformative. Salt counters putrefaction and tastelessness, and light removes darkness and ignorance. Now, in context, Jesus is speaking about the good lives or the good deeds of believers, and it underlines our calling to penetrate society whilst remaining distinct. If society goes rotten, the question to be asking is, where are the Christians? So we need to be a distinctive people. Second, we need to be a praying people. That is, those who appeal to the throne of God. And Wright says that prayer is a political act because we are appealing to the highest authority. He argues for the place of lament and protest as well, and urges us to pray for our leaders, as Paul commands in 1 Timothy chapter 2. But sometimes we will pray against them. We live in Babylon, remember, a place of mendacity, of confusing sexual morals and celebrity culture, of excessive wealth and inequality, of greed and violence and injustice. And we're called to live out our faith in that context. So summing up, we are to lament the injustice, we're to live lives of love and continue to hope in God. And corporate worship is vital too, because it is in worshipping together that our faith is expressed and reinforced, love is inspired and channeled, and hope is nurtured and sustained. So here are your gods is indeed a call to faithful discipleship in idolatrous times. In the words of John Goldingay on the cover, it is fearless, provocative, clear and direct. It's the kind of thinking we need to understand our world and what is happening today.